Owen scrubbed the feeding trough for the third time that morning, his hands raw. From the disinfectant, the dragon. Hatchery O and AMP, Chinese letter Chinese. Letter 7 was the most prestigious breeding facility in the empire, and he had somehow landed the worst job in it. Around him, nobles in silk robes floated through the crystalline halls there, arms full of treasures meant to win the favor of newborn dragons. He dumped the dirty water into the waste chute and wiped his forehead. Through the transparent walls he could see the main presentation chamber where Lady Seraph was holding court. 3 hatchlings, each no bigger than a large dog, sat on elevated platforms while wealthy families lined up to offer gifts. Owen had watched this ritual every day for 2 weeks now. A merchant prince stepped forward, his servants carrying a chest of fire opals. The gems sparkled with inner light, each one worth more than Owen would earn in a lifetime. The hatchlings glanced at the offering, sniffed once, and turned away. The prince's face reddened as he retreated. Next came a military commander with a sword forged from starfall iron, its blade humming with captured energy. Largest hatchling yawned. Owen shook his head and returned to his work. He understood why the Empire valued dragon bonds so highly. A human paired with a mature dragon became nearly unstoppable, combining human creativity with dragon strength and longevity. But the bonding had to happen young, and the hatchlings chose their partners, not the other way around. No amount of wealth or power could force the choice. He hauled his cleaning supplies toward the back nurseries where the runts were kept. These hatchlings were smaller, weaker, or hatched late. The nobles rarely bothered with them. Owen preferred it that way. Less pressure, less disappointed faces. In the smallest nursery, he found a hatchling huddled in the corner. Its scales were pale blue instead of the prestigious gold or crimson. One wing sat crooked. The creature watched him with amber eyes as he entered. Owen set down his bucket and began wiping the floor panels. The hatchling crept closer, curious. It had been alone all morning while the others were paraded before the nobles. He noticed a pebble stuck in the drainage grate and pried it loose. The stone was ordinary gray rock, but the water had worn it smooth over time. Owen turned it over in his palm, admiring how it caught the light. Without thinking, he held it out toward the hatchling. The small dragon's eyes went wide. It chirped a sound of pure delight and snatched the stone from his hand. The hatchling clutched the pebble to its chest, crooning softly. Owen blinked in surprise. He had seen nobles offer gemstones worth entire planets. This creature was thrilled with a common rock. The hatchling nudged his hand, asking for more. Owen dug through his pockets and found only a piece of wire he had been fiddling with during his lunch break. He had twisted it into a loose spiral. Nothing fancy. He offered it anyway. The hatchling grabbed it immediately, weaving the wire between its claws and chirping louder. Within seconds, 2 more hatchlings poked their heads through the doorway, drawn by the sounds of joy. Owen backed toward his supplies, suddenly nervous. These were imperial dragons worth more than his entire home colony. He should not be handling them at all, let alone giving them trash. But the hatchlings surrounded him now, nosing at his pockets and work belt. One found the wooden toggle button that had fallen off his jacket. Another discovered the braided string he used to tie back his hair during heavy work. They played with these worthless objects, like they were the greatest treasures in existence. Owen sat down slowly on the floor, afraid to move too quickly. The pale blue hatchling climbed into his lap still. Clutching its smooth stone, it pressed its small head against his chest and hummed. He had no idea what was happening. The door chimed. Lady Seraph swept into the room, her expression shifting from annoyance to shock when she saw the scene. 3 hatchlings surrounded the maintenance worker, playing with bits of string and wire while completely ignoring the fortune and gifts waiting for them in the main chamber. Her eyes narrowed. She said nothing, but Owen saw her hand move to the communication device at her wrist. This was either going to be very good or very bad. The pale blue hatchling looked up at him and chirped again, happier than Owen had seen any creature in months. It rubbed its head against his worn work shirt, ignoring the noble lady and her fine silks entirely. Owen swallowed hard. He had just finished his shift cleaning waste tunnels and hauling feed bags. He smelled like dragon dung and industrial soap. His clothes were patched and faded. He owned nothing of value, carried nothing of worth. And yet this hatchling, bred from the finest imperial lines, had chosen to sit with him. Lady Seraph spoke into her communicator. In a low, urgent voice, Owen caught only fragments. Investigation impossible. Send observers. The hatchlings paid no attention to her at all. One of them discovered a seed pod stuck to Owen's boot and began batting it around the floor like a toy. Owen realized his simple life was about to become very complicated. The pale blue hatchling yawned and settled more comfortably in his lap, its tiny claws kneading his leg like a contented cat. Owen carefully placed his hand on its back, feeling the warmth of the scales and the flutter of its breathing. Whatever came next, he would face it. But right now, in this moment, he let himself enjoy the impossible truth. These magnificent creatures wanted nothing more than his company and his simple, worthless gifts. Lady Seraph watched from the doorway, her perfect composure finally cracking into an expression of complete confusion. The observation room filled with nobles. Over the next 3 days, all watching Owen through the one-way glass, he tried to ignore them as he went about his duties. But their presence pressed on him like a weight. The hatchlings noticed nothing except the small objects he brought each shift. Owen had started making things during his breaks. He carved a simple boat from scrap wood. The pale blue hatchling squealed with joy and pushed it around the floor like a prized possession. He wove grass into a ball that 5 hatchlings tossed between them all afternoon. From a broken cable he shaped a crude dragon figure that the creatures examined like sacred art. The nobles whispered among themselves. Behind the glass, Owen caught Lady Seraph arguing with a man in military dress. Their voices carried through the ventilation system. The man wanted to remove Owen from the facility. Too disruptive, bad for business. The families paid enormous sums for access to hatchlings, and now their expensive gifts sat untouched, while the creatures mobbed a janitor with literal garbage. Lady Seraph disagreed. She wanted to understand what was happening before making changes. Something unprecedented was occurring, and she refused to waste the opportunity out of pride. Owen focused on his work and tried not to think about being removed. He needed this job. His family depended on the Credits he sent home each month. If he lost this position, he would be back to mining asteroids or hauling cargo on deep space runs. A hatchling nudged his knee. Owen looked down and found the pale blue one staring up at him with expectant eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a twisted piece of foil he had smoothed flat during lunch. The metal caught the light and threw tiny rainbows across the wall. The hatchling took it carefully in its mouth and trotted away to show the others. They gathered around examining the foil with intense concentration. One of them breathed a tiny puff of flame, making the metal glow. Owen smiled despite his worry. These creatures were incredible. He had read about dragons in school, learned their history and importance to the Empire, but nothing prepared him for the reality of their intelligence and curiosity. They were not pets or weapons. They were people in a different shape. The door opened. Lady Sareth entered. Alone this time, her expression unreadable. Owen stood quickly, wiping his hands on his pants. She studied him for a long moment. Then she surprised him by sitting on the floor, graceful even in such an undignified position. 3 hatchlings immediately swarmed her, sniffing her expensive robes and jeweled fingers. They lost interest within seconds and returned to Owen's foil creation. Lady Sareth watched this rejection without expression. She had probably never been ignored by anything in her life. Finally she spoke. Her voice was cold and precise. She wanted to know what trick he was using, what drug or scent or pheromone he put on his objects to make them irresistible. Owen told her the truth. There was no trick. He just made things with his hands. Because he was bored during breaks, he liked creating small objects. It helped him think. She did not believe him. No one was that simple. Everyone wanted something. Owen shrugged. He wanted to keep his job and send money home. That was all. What did he put on the objects then? She demanded. What made them special? He turned a river stone over in his palm, the same way he had done 100 times. Nothing made them special. They were just smooth or shiny or interesting shapes. He polished the stone against the floor during his evening shift, because the repetitive motion calmed his mind after a long day. Lady Sareth took the stone from his hand. She examined it with the eye of someone trained to evaluate precious gems. She handed it back with something like disgust. It was worthless, common silicate, not even a semi-precious mineral. Owen agreed. It was just a rock, but it was smooth now and the color was nice. And he liked how it felt. Why did he like it? She asked. What possible value did a smooth rock have? Owen thought about that. He supposed it had no value to anyone else, but he had spent hours working on it. He knew every curve and surface. He had put time into it, and that made it matter to him. The pale blue hatchling returned and climbed into his lap again. It dropped the foil at his feet and chirped, clearly asking for another gift. Owen pulled out a puzzle he had made from 6 bent nails. They interlocked in a way that looked impossible to separate. The hatchling grabbed the puzzle and began working at it. Immediately, its small claws, surprisingly dexterous. Lady Sareth watched the dragon struggle with the nails, its whole attention focused on solving the problem. Her eyes widened slightly. She stood abruptly and left without another word. Through the glass, Owen saw her speaking urgently to the observers. Several of them looked shocked. One elderly man in scholar's robes began nodding slowly, his expression thoughtful. Owen did not understand what had just happened, but the energy in the observation room changed. The nobles stopped looking angry and started looking fascinated. The pale blue hatchling chirped in triumph. It had separated the nails and dropped them at Owen's feet, demanding he reassemble the puzzle. Owen smiled and began putting the nails back. Together, the hatchling watched every movement with complete attention, learning whatever the nobles had realized. Owen hoped it meant he could keep his job. These creatures needed someone who understood them. The elderly scholar's name was Dr. Finn, and he arrived at Owen's workspace with a recording device. The nobles had granted him permission to interview the maintenance worker directly, though several clearly disapproved. Dr. Finn activated his recorder and asked Owen to describe his process. How did he choose what to make? What materials did he prefer? Owen explained that he just made whatever came to mind. If he found interesting wire, he bent it into shapes. If he saw a nice stone, he polished it. He was just bored during breaks and liked keeping his hands busy. The doctor asked if Owen had training in art or craftsmanship. Owen laughed. He had basic education, enough to read manuals and operate machinery. His only training was in maintenance systems. He learned to fix things because broken equipment meant no pay. Dr. Finn asked him to create something. While they talked, anything at all. Owen dug through his supply bag and found a length of copper tubing left over from a repair job. He also had some wire and a small gear that had fallen out of a ventilation fan. He sat on the floor and began twisting the pieces together, not really thinking about what he was making. The hatchlings appeared within minutes, drawn by the sounds of metal scraping metal. They gathered around him in a semicircle, watching his hands with intense focus. Dr. Finn observed them carefully, but said nothing. Owen's hands moved automatically, bending the tubing into a spiral and threading the wire through the gear teeth. He attached the gear to one end so it could spin freely. The finished object looked like a strange mechanical flower with a rotating center. He set it on the floor. The pale blue hatchling immediately grabbed it and spun the gear with one claw. The wire caught the light as it turned, throwing tiny flashes around the room. The hatchling made a sound of pure wonder. Dr. Finn leaned forward. He asked Owen what he was thinking about while he built the object. Owen shrugged. He was thinking about the conversation mostly. His hands just did what felt right with the materials available. The doctor asked if he planned the design in advance. Owen said no. He just started connecting pieces and saw where it went. Sometimes things turned out interesting. Sometimes they did not work and he threw them away. Dr. Finn made more notes, his expression growing more excited. He asked if Owen ever sold his creations or showed them to others. Owen explained that he never considered them worth selling. They were just idle fidgeting. Given shape, he usually threw them away at the end of his shift, but lately he had been giving them to the hatchlings because the creatures seemed to enjoy them. The doctor asked the key question then. Did Owen understand why the hatchlings preferred his own objects over the expensive gifts from nobles? Owen admitted he had no idea. It made no sense. A twisted piece of wire should not be more valuable than a fire opal or starfall iron. Dr. Finn smiled. He explained that Owen was wrong about value. The hatchlings were not responding to monetary worth. They were responding to creative investment. Dragons were beings of creation and transformation. What they valued above all was the act of creation itself. The nobles brought purchased items, beautiful, but they required no creative effort from the giver. Someone else had made them. Owen's gifts were different. Each carried the mark of his personal effort and creative thought. He transformed raw materials into something new through his own hands and mind. The hatchlings recognized this creative spark, the same force that drove dragons to build and shape and transform. To dragon, Owen's wire flower was infinitely more precious than any purchased gem because it contained genuine creation. Owen sat quietly processing this. The pale blue hatchling still played with the spinning gear, utterly content. Dr. Finn continued. The nobility had forgotten this truth over generations. They thought dragon bonds could be purchased like any other commodity. They competed with wealth instead of creativity. They had turned the sacred act of bonding into a financial transaction. Owen had unknowingly demonstrated what every ancient text said about dragons. They chose partners who created, who built, who transformed raw potential into realized form, not because of money or power, but because those who create understand the fundamental nature of what dragons are. The doctor stood and deactivated his recorder. He told Owen that his findings would cause chaos among the noble families. Everything they believed about dragon bonding was wrong, and a maintenance worker with no wealth or status had proven it. Owen asked if he would lose his job. Dr. Finn laughed. Owen was about to become the most important person in the facility. The Emperor himself would want to meet him. The entire dragon bonding system would have to be restructured based on what these hatchlings had revealed. The pale blue hatchling climbed into Owen's lap and curled up, still clutching the wire flower. It looked at him with complete trust and affection. Owen stroked its head gently, his mind reeling. He had come here to clean waste tunnels and haul feed bags. Now a scholar was telling him he had accidentally overturned centuries of tradition, all because he liked making small objects during his breaks. Dr. Finn paused at the door. He mentioned that the Emperor's personal dragon had not shown interest in anything for nearly 30 years. Ancient creature was coming to the facility tomorrow. It wanted to meet Owen. The Emperor arrived without fanfare, which somehow made his presence more intimidating. Owen had expected trumpets and guards. Instead, an older man, simple robes, walked into the nursery, accompanied by a creature that made Owen's breath catch. The dragon was massive, easily 4 times the size of a transport shuttle. Its bronze scales had darkened to near black with age. Scars crossed its flanks from battles fought before Owen was born. The creature moved with careful precision, each step deliberate. Emperor Halcyon looked nothing like the portraits in government buildings. He had kind eyes and calloused hands. He nodded to Owen the way one worker might greet another. The ancient dragon, however, stared at Owen with an intensity that made him want to hide. Its eyes were molten gold, deep with intelligence that had watched empires rise and fall. Lady Sareth began formal introductions. But the Emperor waved her to silence. He asked Owen directly if the reports were true. Could he really create objects that dragons preferred over imperial treasures? Owen fumbled for words. He did not create anything special. He just made small things during breaks. The hatchlings seemed to like them, but he did not understand why. The Emperor smiled slightly. He said, "That was the exact answer Dr. Finn had predicted." He asked if Owen would demonstrate his process. Owen looked around the nursery. He had nothing prepared. His pockets contained only a broken buckle from his work belt. He pulled out the buckle, bent and useless. He found string in his supply bag and washers from a repair kit. The ancient dragon lowered its head, watching. Owen sat and began working. His hands shook at first, but as he focused on the materials, nervousness faded. He straightened the buckle, threaded washers onto the string with knots to separate them, and tied the ends to the buckle. When shaken, the washers clinked and rattled. It was nothing, a simple noise maker. He offered it to the Emperor. The ancient dragon moved before the Emperor could respond. The massive creature lowered its head until its nose nearly touched Owen's hand. It sniffed the simple toy carefully, its breath hot enough to make sweat break out on Owen's forehead. Then the dragon made a sound Owen had never heard before. It was a deep rumble that resonated in his chest, not threatening but filled with something like satisfaction. The dragon opened its mouth. Owen froze, certain he had made a terrible mistake. The creature gently took the toy from his hand, careful not to catch his fingers with teeth the size of daggers. It lifted its head and shook the toy. Experimentally, the washers rattled. The dragon's eyes brightened with something that looked absurdly like delight. Emperor Halsin stared at his bonded partner in shock. He whispered that Torvin had not played with anything in 30 years. The dragon had lost interest in games and puzzles long ago, becoming solemn and distant. But now Torvin shook the simple rattle again, clearly pleased with the sound. The ancient dragon set it down carefully and nudged it toward Owen, the same gesture the hatchlings made when they wanted him to create something new. Owen swallowed hard. He asked if the Emperor had anything he could use. Halsin searched his pockets and produced a stylus, a data chip, and a decorative pin from his robe. All were expensive items, probably worth more than Owen earned in a year. Owen took them hesitantly. He examined the pieces, turning them over in his hands. The pin could be unbent. The chip was flat and smooth. The stylus could be taken apart. He began working, hyper-aware of the massive dragon watching his every move. He unbent the pin and used it to attach the data chip to the stylus body. When he flicked it, the chip spun around the stylus like a tiny propeller. It was absurd. He had just destroyed what were probably priceless imperial possessions to make a child's toy. But when he offered it to Torin, the ancient dragon took it with the same careful gentleness and began experimenting with how to make the chip spin fastest. Emperor Halsin sat down on the floor next to Owen, all formality abandoned. He asked how Owen did it, what made his creation special. Owen gave the same answer he had given Dr. Finn. He did not know. He just worked with whatever materials were available and tried to make something interesting. The Emperor pressed further. But why these shapes? Why these combinations? Owen tried to explain. He looked at materials and saw possibilities. The buckle could be straightened. The washers could move. Together they could make sound. His hands just followed what seemed right. Halcyon was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that changed Owen's life. The Emperor declared that starting immediately all candidates seeking dragon bonds would be required to create their own gifts, no more purchased treasures, no more wealth determining worthiness. Creation would be the only measure. Lady Seraph protested. The noble families would revolt. They had paid fortunes for access to hatchlings. The Emperor said they could pay fortunes to learn humility instead. Dr. Fenn would design a new program. Owen would help teach it. Owen started to object. He was not a teacher. He was a maintenance worker who made trash sculptures during breaks. Halcyon smiled. That was precisely why he was perfect for the role. He had no ego. Invested in the old ways. He created for the joy of creation, not for status or recognition. Torin brought the spinning toy back to Owen and nudged his hand. The ancient dragon wanted to learn how to make the chip spin without using its mouth. Owen, still processing the Emperor's declaration, automatically began showing the dragon how to flick the toy with the tip of one claw. The transformation of the hatchery began. Within days, Dr. Fenn established workshops where nobles and common citizens could learn basic crafting. The halls that once displayed wealth now echoed with hammering, sawing, and frustrated curses. Owen found himself teaching others how to work with simple materials. Merchant Prince stared at wood and a carving knife with bewilderment. He had never used his hands for anything beyond signing contracts. Owen demonstrated basic cuts. The merchant's first attempts produced splinters and crooked gouges. He threw the wood down, demanding to know how anyone could master such impossible skills. Owen examined the ruined piece and pointed out that the random cuts created interesting texture. If he kept going, adding marks in a pattern, it might become something worth showing. The merchant tried again. Across the room, Lady Seraph struggled with wire bending, her hands trained for delicate gestures and graceful movements, could not apply the right pressure. Every attempt resulted in kinked metal or broken strands. She had never failed at anything in her privileged life, and the experience clearly disturbed her. Owen offered guidance, but she waved him away with barely controlled anger. She would master this herself or not at all. The hatchlings wandered through the workshops, examining the attempts with critical eyes. Most creations were ignored. A few received brief attention before being abandoned. The nobles who had expected quick success found themselves facing repeated rejection. Many gave up. They returned to their estates, declaring the entire exercise beneath their dignity. If dragon bonds could not be purchased, they would do without. But others stayed. Some discovered they actually enjoyed the process of making things. A military officer found unexpected satisfaction in wood carving. A politician's daughter became fascinated with metalwork. They began creating not to impress dragons, but because they genuinely wanted to see what their hands could produce. These were the ones the hatchlings chose. Owen watched a young woman named Riva present a roughly carved bird to the pale blue hatchling. The bird was crude, its proportions wrong, but Riva had spent 3 days working on it, and her determination was visible in every chisel mark. The hatchling examined it from every angle, then chirped and pressed against Reva's leg, the first gesture of bonding. Acceptance. Reva burst into tears. She had never expected to qualify. Her family had modest wealth, nothing compared to great houses, but she had created something genuine. Similar scenes played out across the facility. Bonds formed based on creativity, not bloodline or wealth. Emperor Halcyon visited regularly, often bringing Torvin. The ancient dragon had rediscovered joy in puzzles and games, spending hours working on the challenges Owen created. Halcyon mentioned that their bond felt renewed, as if they were hatchling and young man again instead of ancient partners worn down by duty. The Emperor asked Owen to create a formal curriculum, something that could be taught across the Empire, ensuring future generations understood the truth about dragon bonds. Owen protested that he was not qualified. He still did not fully understand his own process. How could he teach others? Halcyon said that was exactly why Owen must try. The old teachers had claimed to understand everything, and their certainty had led the Empire astray. Owen's honest uncertainty would keep the teaching true. Dr. Fenn agreed. He had been documenting Owen's methods and had noticed something important. Owen never created the same thing twice. He adapted to available materials and let each piece develop organically. This flexibility was the key. Creation could not be reduced to rigid formulas. The curriculum they developed together emphasized experimentation over perfection. Students were encouraged to fail, to try strange combinations, to trust their instinct. The goal was not to produce master craftsmen, but to awaken the creative impulse that dragons recognized and valued. Lady Sarah finally succeeded in creating a wire sculpture after weeks of practice. It was a simple geometric form, nothing like Owen's flowing organic shapes, but it was hers, made through genuine effort and countless failures. She presented it to the largest hatchling, the one that had ignored her expensive gifts weeks ago. The hatchling studied the sculpture, then made a sound of approval. It did not choose to bond with her, but it accepted the gift and kept it. Seraph smiled for the first time since Owen had met her. She understood now the bond was not guaranteed, even with genuine creation, but the act itself had value beyond any transactional outcome. Owen found the pale blue hatchling waiting in his quarters one evening. The creature had been following him constantly for weeks, always choosing to be near him rather than the other hatchlings. He sat on his bunk, and the hatchling climbed into his lap, now nearly too large to fit comfortably. It hummed and pressed its head against his chest. Owen realized what was happening. The bond was forming not through any formal ceremony, but through simple, constant companionship. The hatchling had chosen him completely. He stroked its scales, feeling the warmth and the slight vibration of its breathing. He had come to this facility expecting to spend his life cleaning waste tunnels. Instead, he had somehow earned the partnership of a creature worth more than entire planets. Dr. Fenn appeared in the doorway. He smiled and said Owen should name the hatchling. Every bonded dragon deserved a name. Owen looked at the pale blue scales, the crooked wing that had marked this creature as lesser in the eyes of nobles who valued only perfection. He said the first name that came to mind. and somehow it felt exactly right. The imperial decree reached every corner of the empire within a month. All dragon bonding facilities would adopt the new system. No purchase gifts. Every candidate must create with their own hands. The noble families protested, but Emperor Hassan refused to negotiate. Owen became the most sought-after person in the empire. Nobles offered fortunes to teach their children. Military academies demanded he design training programs. Scientists wanted to study his brain. He refused most requests. He was not special, he just made things because it was enjoyable, but he did agree to travel to other facilities and demonstrate his methods. The pale blue dragon, now named Clarity for how its scales caught light, accompanied him everywhere. At each facility, Owen encountered the same resistance, nobles who believed their status entitled them to bonds, teachers who insisted creation required years of formal training, officials who wanted rigid rules and guaranteed outcomes. Owen told them all the same thing. Creation could not be forced or formalized. It emerged from curiosity, experimentation, and the willingness to fail. Dragons valued the spark of making something new, not the polished result of established technique. Some understood, many did not. A young boy at the northern facility showed Owen a twisted piece of grass he had woven into a loose knot. It was nothing, barely held together, but the boy explained that he wanted to see if grass could be strong enough to hold weight. He had been testing different weaving patterns. Owen recognized that curiosity. Immediately, he introduced the boy to the hatchlings. Within an hour, a small green dragon had chosen him, not because the grass knot was beautiful or valuable, but because the boy's mind was asking questions and seeking answers through his hands. That was what dragons saw, the active, searching, creative mind. Owen met resistance of a different kind. At the military academy, the commanders wanted him to teach efficiency, how to create bonding where the objects in the shortest time with the least waste. They needed soldiers bonded to dragons quickly for the ongoing border conflicts. Owen explained that speed and efficiency were antithetical to genuine creation. The process required time to explore, to make mistakes, to discover unexpected possibilities. Rushing it would produce empty objects that looked right but felt wrong to dragons. The commanders argued that the empire was at war. They could not afford philosophical luxuries. They needed dragon-bonded soldiers now. Owen stood his ground. He said that even in war some truths could not be compromised. Dragons would not bond with soldiers trained in assembly line creation. The commanders could waste time trying to force the process, or they could invest time doing it properly. Either way, there were no shortcuts. Emperor Helson supported Owen's position. The war would be won or lost. With current forces, the new bonding system was about the empire's future, not its immediate military needs. Months passed. The transformation spread slowly, resisted by those who benefited from the old system, but gradually evidence became undeniable. Facilities using Owen's approach produced more bonds. The bonds formed were stronger. The empire began to change. Common citizens now had genuine chances at dragon bonds. Focus on creation sparked interest in crafts dismissed as inferior to luxury. Markets for handmade goods flourished. Schools added workshops. Dragons chose humans at rates not seen. In centuries, they had been waiting for humanity to remember what mattered. Owen returned to the original hatchery a year later. Workshops were full of students from all levels working side by side. The atmosphere had completely transformed. Lady Sereth had bonded with a dragon that appreciated her precise sculptures. The merchant prince now ran a furniture workshop. Riva had become an instructor. Dr. Fenn published his research, energized by witnessing such change. Emperor Hausen invited Owen to the palace. Torin had requested one final puzzle, something to challenge an ancient mind that had rediscovered play. Owen spent a week creating an intricate mechanical box with moving parts and hidden compartments. It required specific sequences of movements to open, each step revealing a new challenge. Torin spent days solving it, utterly content. Hausen offered Owen any position he wanted: Minister of Culture, head of the Imperial Dragon Academy, whatever title would let him continue his work with official authority. Owen declined. He was still a maintenance worker at heart. He liked working with his hands more than managing bureaucracies. He would continue teaching where needed, but he did not want power or status. The emperor smiled and said he had expected that answer. Owen's lack of ambition was part of why dragons trusted him. He wanted nothing except to create and help others discover their own creative spark. Clarity, now fully grown and magnificent, despite the pale coloring nobles once scorned, rested her head on Owen's shoulder. Her presence was reminder enough. He had given nothing valuable by the Empire's old measures, just simple objects made from discarded materials. But he had given what mattered most, the gift of genuine creation, and the dragon Barbies had loved it.